In 1929, Polish immigrants Julian and Catherine Nikwicz bought a farm in Bolton, Massachusetts. Nearly a century later, 4 of their grandsons still run it. But before this story goes any further, one detail needs correcting. The family did not buy 4 farms during the crash. They bought one. The number 4 belongs to the brothers operating it today. And that correction leads to a much better story, because the Nicewiczes did not make a perfectly timed investment. They bought before anyone knew how bad things were about to become. The surviving farm history says Julian and Catherine purchased the property shortly after immigrating from Poland, but it gives no month, price, down payment, or mortgage terms. So we cannot claim they waited for Black Tuesday, found a foreclosure for pennies, or somehow knew where the bottom would be. What the records do show is more unsettling. They became responsible for American farmland at almost the worst possible moment to own it. Most people remember the 1920s as prosperous. American farmers remember something else. Wartime demand had encouraged them to plant more, expand, and borrow. Then overseas demand weakened, surpluses grew, crop prices fell, and the debt stayed exactly where it was. The stock market had not crashed yet, but out in farm country, the crisis was already underway. The United States Census recorded the damage. Nationally, the average value of farmland, excluding buildings, fell from more than $57 an acre in 1920 to just over $40 in 1925. By 1930, it was roughly $35. Land already looked cheaper when Julian and Catherine entered the market. But cheaper was not the same as safe. In fact, the worst decline was still ahead. Here is the first financial lesson hiding inside this farm. A falling asset can look like a bargain long before it stops falling. From the fall of 1930 through the winter of 1933, the nation's money supply contracted by nearly 30%, according to Federal Reserve history. Prices and incomes fell, but debts did not politely shrink with them. Every fixed payment became heavier because the dollars needed to make it became harder to earn. Farm real estate values dropped another 37% in only 3 years, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. So imagine buying what looked like discounted land in 1929, only to watch similar land become much cheaper after you had committed your money. If this were your retirement savings, could you keep making payments while the same asset was being offered down the road at an even lower price? That is the difference between spotting a low price and surviving one. And survival depended on something a price chart could not show. Bolton sat in eastern Massachusetts, within reach of the large consumer markets around Boston and Worcester. That location gave local farmers an option many isolated farms did not have. Massachusetts could not beat the Midwest at producing endless acres of cheap grain. Local farmers adapted by growing valuable products on smaller plots near large groups of customers. The Nicewicz property became an orchard with apples, peaches, and pears. And that crop mix quietly changed the kind of risk the family faced. Fruit trees are not a quick trade. They demand care before producing meaningful revenue, while frost, spoilage, and weak demand can erase a harvest. But an orchard near major towns also offers more than one harvest window. Apples, peaches, and pears do not all mature on the same day. That does not eliminate risk, and the public history does not tell us how Julian and Catherine handled every depression year. Still, the farm gives us a clue. When cash is scarce, Several useful products sold at different moments can be safer than one giant bet on a single crop and price. Yet there is another trap in this story, and it is easy to miss. We have no evidence that the Nikwicz became rich during the Depression. There is no appraisal showing a sudden fortune or documented windfall. What we have instead is continuity. The farm survived long enough to pass from the immigrants who bought it to the generations who came after them. That may sound less exciting than instant wealth. Financially, it is much harder. Holding an asset through a crisis means living through the years when the market refuses to prove you right. Taxes arrive, buildings need repairs, and equipment wears out. Meanwhile, the price of the property may be telling you that waiting would have been smarter. So what kept this land valuable after the crisis passed? The answer was not simply patience. The business around the land kept changing. For decades, the farm sold primarily to wholesalers. That moved large harvests, but placed another buyer between the family and the customer. The wholesaler controlled part of the margin, and the farm depended on someone else's willingness to distribute what it produced. Then, in the early 1990s, the third generation changed the route to the customer. The brothers established a farm stand and began selling at local farmers' markets. Look at what changed. The land stayed in the same place, but the way it produced cash did not. Today, its crop list includes apples, peaches, nectarines, apricots, pears, plums, blueberries, corn, vegetables, cut flowers, and locally known peonies. 4 brothers, David, Alan, Ken, and Tommy, now operate the property with help from family and friends. One farm purchased by 2 immigrants had become a platform that each generation could adjust. And that is where the real financial mechanism finally appears. The advantage was never just the land. Farmland without customers, working capital, labor, and adaptation can become an expensive burden. The durable advantage was keeping control of the underlying property while changing what it produced and how those products reached the buyer. That is what people often miss when they say a crisis creates opportunity. A crisis does not place a gift on the table. It changes the price of risk. And sometimes the price falls because the future cash flow has become genuinely dangerous. Julian and Catherine bought in 1929, but the national bottom in agricultural land came later. Their purchase looked worse before it ever looked better. They were not rewarded for predicting the exact bottom. If anything, the evidence points in the opposite direction. What mattered was remaining capable of ownership after the timing appeared wrong. Even then, survival depended on conditions no investor can copy on command. The farm had access to major regional markets. Family labor almost certainly mattered across generations, although the surviving history doesn't calculate its cost. Weather, health, credit, and luck always shape agriculture. And we are looking at a survivor while thousands of equally hard-working families lost their land. This does not mean you should buy distressed property in the next recession, or that every falling asset will recover. A human crisis does not automatically create wealth. The useful lesson is narrower and much more demanding. Before buying what a crisis has made cheaper, ask yourself 4 questions. Can the asset produce something people will need? And can you carry it if the value falls much further? Can you create more than one source of cash flow without damaging it? And can you reach the customer if the old distribution system stops working? Those 4 questions tell us more than the purchase year ever could. The popular version of this story gives one Polish family 4 farms and perfect timing. The documented version gives them 1 farm, an uncertain entry point, a collapsing economy, 3 generations, and 4 brothers still working the same ground. I believe the second version is stronger. It replaces the fantasy of buying at the bottom with the harder discipline of staying solvent, useful, and adaptable long enough for ownership to matter. If you had been standing in Bolton in 1929, would you have bought before the bottom, or held your cash and risked never owning the land at all? Tell me which choice you would have made and why. And subscribe if you want more documented stories about immigrant families who faced financial collapse without turning history into a get-rich-quick myth. Because another immigrant story begins with almost no money, a business built during the Depression, and a company Warren Buffett would eventually buy. The question is not how that family held on to the land. It is how they built something so valuable that one of the greatest investors in American history came looking for them.